It's live right now. Val, say Andy and Katie.
Got it.
Gallery view.
Yeah, it's
So if Adrian and Keith would come back onto the screen, we can start introductions. George, we're ready for you to go ahead and start with your introduction.
okay. Good evening and welcome to this virtual candidates forum presented by the Twisp Valley Grange. My name is George Schneider and I'm honored to have been asked to serve as tonight's moderator. I'm also fighting a bad cold, so if my voice starts to fade through the evening, please excuse that. We first want to start out with just a few important thank yous to the Grange and to community members that have made this possible. Steve and Terry Dixon, Simon Windell, Wendy Braden, and most of all our host this evening, representing the Grange, Val Hecker. And thanks, of course, to the 4 candidates who are joining us this evening, not only for taking the time to spend with us tonight, but for stepping up to do the sometimes thankless leadership jobs in our county and our state. So thank you all for being here and making this happen. Tonight we have candidates for 2 positions: the Okanagan County Commissioner District 2, the incumbent Andy Hover, and the challenger Katie Havens are both here. We also have candidates for the Washington House of Representatives 12th District, the incumbent Keith Gaynor and challenger Adrian Moore are with us. We're going to do this evening's forum in 2 halves. The first half will be the commissioner's race, and right about 7:15, we will have a very quick transition to the state house race. If you don't know, the election is coming up on August 4th, which is a primary election. Ballots will be mailed out to all voters on July 17th. The general election will take place on November 3rd, with ballots being mailed out on October 16th. For the general election, you will see on your ballot that there's also, in addition to some state races, another county commissioner race. That's the District 1 race. The candidates are Chris Branch and Shauna Beeman. And if the Grange is definitely considering hosting another forum between now and the general election. And if that happens, Chris and Shauna would certainly be invited. So this is a virtual format. It's the first for the Twisp Grange, but the purpose, as stated in the League of Women Voters guidelines, is the same as it always has been. The purpose of this forum is to give the public a chance to become better informed voters by hearing our candidates speak to a wide range of issues relevant to the position they're running for. Now, this virtual format doesn't allow for live audience reaction or on-the-fly submission of questions, even though I understand that YouTube Live does have some features where you can make comments and chat, but we won't be entertaining input on the YouTube Live. Instead, we've gathered questions from the community in advance, and we've edited those and compiled those questions. The candidates have all seen the first 2 questions. All the others will be pleasant surprises to them. The way this will work is each candidate will have 1 minute to answer each of the questions, except for the very first question, which has a 2-minute allowance, and the closing statement, which has a 2-minute allowance. Each candidate also has 2 rebuttals that they can use if they choose throughout the evening. And a rebuttal can take up to 1 minute, and you can have a rebuttal of a rebuttal, which counts as a rebuttal, which can also be a minute. Now, Simon Windell there is our timer. He'll be using a yellow flag to indicate that you have 15 seconds left to answer your question, and a red flag indicates that time is up. So the sentence or the thought that is in progress needs to be finished up and be the last. So we're going to now start the county commissioner section of this. So we'll ask Keith and Adrienne to step aside, mute yourselves, and we'll get going. Okay, everything seemed to be working well technically before we get started, Val? Simon? I'm getting thumbs up.
Looks good.
Okay, great.
That's affirmative.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're gonna start the questions with Katie Haven. She was the first to submit her her application for the position. We'll alternate questions between Katie and Andy. So Katie, you have 2 minutes for the first question. Welcome, by the way.
Thank you.
Katie, how would you define leadership? I've already made a mistake, my first mistake. Andy was actually the first to file papers, right? So this question goes to you. So at least that's the way I have it written. So Andy?
I don't believe so, but I will go first if you want.
Okay. It doesn't matter too much. Everybody's going to get their opportunity. So Andy, how would you define leadership? And what experiences do you believe have prepared you to be an effective leader in county government? 2 minutes.
Thanks, George. First, I want to say thanks to everybody who's watching out there. Really appreciate this. My definition of leadership is a person who has vision, integrity, and empathy, being a good communicator, possessing strength of character, being trustworthy, and being able to make hard decisions. For a county commissioner, these qualities allow them to understand that not only must they be a leader who is looking out for the safety and interests of the people, but also that you serve the people they represent. Growing up on a farm, I learned early on about hard work, drive to get the job done, and problem-solving skills. I feel that work ethic and determination learned at a young age was invaluable as I got older. Getting an education in management and business at college, managing businesses as I got older, and growing up in this valley and being affected by the issues that are as relevant today as they were back then, gave me a really good starting point for being a commissioner. Now, after 3.5 years serving as a representative of the people, I believe that I've learned much more about the complexity of the issues that are relevant to us and the processes within government itself. I feel I have gotten better at listening to all aspects of issues and making sure that I think critically about those aspects and how those will affect people in this county. I also feel that I've built a level of trust within our county government itself that makes things run more efficiently and gives greater service to the taxpayers.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Katie, the same question to you. How would you define leadership? And what experiences do you believe have prepared you to be an effective leader in county government? 2 minutes.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for watching. I agree with the classic definition of leadership, which is the art of motivating a group of people to act towards achieving a common goal. And I think the qualities that make a good leader are generating enthusiasm, making people want to achieve that goal together, being clear in your direction, and being decisive, able to make decisions. You also have to have a level of humility. You have to know what you don't know. And that means you have to appoint advisors that you trust, who are experts in their field, and who you also trust to give you honest feedback. And you have to be willing to listen to that feedback, even if it's not what you want or expect to hear. As far as experience, my local experience here goes back 22 years. For the past 12 years, I've been living the life that embodies the values that we hold so close here. Working hard, taking care of the land, lending a helping hand to neighbors, and in my case, raising livestock. I've also made time to attend meetings at the county, to keep up with the business and to participate in the process when I can. And I do this because I want to be a part of preserving what is best about this place that we all love so much. My practical managerial experience started when I was 18. I got my captain's license, and that led me to a maritime academy where I graduated one of 2 women in my class of engineers. I went on to become an officer in the United States Merchant Marine. And when I was 38 years old, I had achieved the highest rank in my field, which is a chief engineer on an ocean-going passenger ship. During that career, I led teams of people. I managed complex projects. And I learned how to make critical decisions under pressure. My ship had a reputation for being well run and with very few personnel issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Katie, we'll continue with you with the second question. What are your priorities for county spending, and how can we insulate ourselves from a possible $9 billion state budget shortfall? 1 minute.
Okay, so my priorities are fully fund the public health department for obvious reasons, and also to fund our court system. We have to do everything we can to qualify for the funds that we're entitled to. First of all, the federal money that we get for our hospitals, our schools, our roads, that's all based on our population. So it is important to do the little things like promoting the census to make sure that everybody is counted. We currently have the third lowest response rate in the state, and we have to do better because we are entitled to that. People worked hard and paid their taxes, and they deserve to have that money coming back here. We have to make sure that we seek out and are prepared for any state grants. You know, we've failed on that in the past by not being interested or not paying attention and missing opportunities. So I think that we need to do much better on that.
Thank you. Andy, same question. What are your priorities for county spending, and how can we insulate ourselves from a possible $9 billion state budget shortfall?
So first off, I want to start that this question should have taken way more than a minute because it is really complex. So just in short, my priorities are health and safety, government services, maintenance and infrastructure, reserve accounts, and then all other non-essential projects and expenditures. And it's in that order. We have a reserve account. And when I came into office, we had a $3 million loan that was attached to our budget to pay for wages and other expenditures in the beginning of the year. In 3 years, I am the lead on the budget. In 3 years, we have over $1 million in reserve now, which is actually still less than 50% of what the state auditor wants. But that reserve being at $2.3 million will help insulate from things like this. And I'm out of time.
You can finish the sentence.
I was going to say it'll help insulate from issues like this and issues further on down the road.
Okay, thank you. Andy, the third question to you: what will you do to support economic recovery from the COVID pandemic?
So we have the Economic Development District. We work really close with them. They are, it's important that you work with all of the different entities that actually distribute funds out in the community. So that's Community Action, the Economic Development District. The way that you can get money out is by really working with those groups, making sure that the money that's being distributed, that the information's out there, that getting the money out there, getting it distributed through those groups is important for this economic revitalization. I think that getting the businesses back on track is really important.
Okay, thank you. Katie, same question. What would you do to support economic recovery from the COVID pandemic? 1 minute.
Well, the first thing I would do is try to get everybody on board to get this pandemic behind us so we can start safely opening our businesses. But yes, we need to promote our small business opportunities, give them the tools that they need, and work with I agree with what Andy says. We need to work with all the organizations that are out there that are supporting what our businesses need to be doing. But I will add, there's been a lot of support already. On Monday, the numbers came out, and our businesses in this county have currently received over $50 million that's been injected into our local economy. So, you know, that money hopefully is going towards saving the jobs and getting people back on track. And I think we just need to work together and encourage people to participate and go to the local businesses and give them all the business that we can.
Thank you, Katie. Continuing, this is kind of a related question. Do you believe our county is adequately addressing the health and safety needs created by the coronavirus? And do you support mandatory measures such as face masks in retail stores?
I think that we could have done a much better job. I think that, first of all, there's two things that help you get through a crisis. You have to have a plan, and you have to have leadership that makes that plan work. And we have our plan. Our public health department has told us what to do. What we lacked was the leadership in really motivating people. We had our leaders telling us that it's optional to wear masks. I don't think it should be optional. I think that we should encourage people and model the behavior ourselves. And if we do that and everybody voluntarily does it, then that's great. If people are refusing to follow the instructions and the advice of the professionals, then I think it's time to tell them that, you know, there's going to be some consequences if you don't follow the rules. You are not only risking your own life, but you are putting other people's lives at risk. And that is what it comes down to. I think that this has caused a lot of distress in our community.
Thank you. Andy, same question. Is our county adequately addressing the health and safety needs created by the coronavirus? And do you support mandatory measures like face masks in retail stores?
So I don't think that we were able to adequately address it because I don't think that public health was being funded enough. The problem is that the state has not looked at public health as needing the level of funding that I think they needed to get through this. The county does have a emergency management plan. We have a all hazards mitigation plan that we followed. Under FS08, which is for pandemics, the public health was the lead for this crisis. And we were looking to public health to, you know, do a lot of the things that needed to be done. Unfortunately, they just weren't funded enough. And no, I don't believe in mandatory masks. However, I do believe that they actually stop the spread of viruses. That's why people wear them when they're operating on you. And I think that people should wear them, but I don't believe in mandatory.
Thank you. Continuing along the public health topic, Andy, underfunded hospitals and insurance lost through unemployment have put us at risk. What can you do at the county level to support our rural healthcare system?
So one thing that I actually did do was during this crisis, all of the hospitals were shut down for elective surgeries. And that's actually how all of our hospitals pay all of their bills. So I was on the phone with the director of the Three Rivers Hospital, CEO, and trying to get from him information about how much 6 months worth of their expenditures would be, and then getting on the phone with our state and federal representatives, trying to figure out, okay, how is the CARES Act coming in? How is that funding coming in? When's it coming in? So it's as a county commissioner, you have to be able to work with those state and federal partners and try to push real hard to help funnel this funding into our rural healthcare.
Thank you. Katie, same question. Underfunded hospitals and insurance loss through unemployment have put us at risk. What can you do at the county level to support our rural healthcare system?
Well, I think we need to support our whole healthcare system nationwide and figure out a better model than what we have. You know, our hospitals were doing really well. They increased employment by a significant percentage from 2008 to 2018. And it's a shame to see those jobs potentially being lost because of the financial struggles. So I agree that we have to work with all the other agencies and government entities out there. I mentioned the census earlier, and I think that's important. That's a small thing, but it can result in big, more money coming back to our hospitals. It is a major source of funding. So we need to support them every way we can, and we need to make sure that that we take advantage of all the opportunities to leverage any funding that we get from other government entities.
Thank you. And Andy, I saw your hand raised for a 1-minute rebuttal. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
Go ahead.
Another thing that I'd say, I guess it's not necessarily a rebuttal, but it's just when you talk about state and federal agencies, the other thing that county commissioners have to do is push for Medicaid and Medicare reform. Right now, they're being so underfunded with patients coming in, especially in Okanagan County, because a large demographic, a large group of county residents actually are on Medicare and Medicaid, and the payments are so low that, like, for our EMS districts, it makes it very, very hard to operate in this county when you're not getting fully funded through those patients. And so another thing that we really need to do is push for reform in Medicare and Medicaid, and we've been trying to do that.
Okay, thank you. Katie, this question goes to you first. Several weeks back, there was a controversial Facebook post by County Commissioner Jim Detro. In light of that, what, if anything, would you do to help heal the unhealthy political divisions and discord in our county and our society?
Well, I'm committed to addressing racism in all its forms. I think we need to lead by example. We need to not allow hateful and violent speech to take place in our county government by any county representative. And I spoke out about that very strongly. I think that we need to make our county a welcoming place for everybody, no matter what you look like, what language you speak, where you worship, what you call yourself. Everyone needs to feel welcome here. And there are some models out there of ways to improve that. Some communities have diversity advisory committees where they get people together to increase the communication among the different groups and between those groups and their local government. I just talked with someone today in a city that has such a model, and she was explaining to me about some of the wonderful successes they've had. So I'd like to explore something along those lines.
Thank you. Andy, prompted by the Jim Detro Facebook incident, tell us what, if anything, you would do to help heal the unhealthy political divisions and discord in our county and our society.
I think one of the main problems is Facebook, actually. People get on there and they just say whatever they want because they feel like they're protected behind a screen. And I don't think that this county, the people in it, should be saying that. Anybody should be saying those things. I think that this divide gets wider and wider all the time because people, they won't take a step back and they won't look at other people's points of view, and they won't allow for the possibility that there's other thought out there. And I think that, you know, moving forward through this, all the elected officials, government officials, county, statewide, need to really try to put the brakes on these remarks and this way of thinking.
Thank you. Andy, this question starts with you. Recent demonstrations against racism and police misconduct are widespread. Do you see a need to rebalance our support for law enforcement with some police reform to ensure racial justice and equality?
In Okanagan County, no, I don't. I think that when you actually look at our jail population, when you look at the calls that we get, I don't think that we have unnecessarily high racial issues when it comes to policing. I think that the police force here does an excellent job. I think that they need to be funded so they can do their job. They keep people safe. That's their job. That's part of county government, is providing those services. I do think that you know, if we as commissioners get have an issue brought to light, that we go and talk to the elected official who's a sheriff, and we discuss those issues, and we try to find out if there is a possibility for resolution, or you know, how we best get through those issues.
Thank you. Same question, Katie. Recent demonstrations against racism and police misconduct are widespread. Do you see a need to rebalance our support for law enforcement with some police reform to ensure racial justice and equality?
I think that the first thing we need to do is get the opinion of the people who are on the receiving end. You know, I think that's where a lot of our problems are coming from, is that a lack of communication. You know, Black and brown people have been telling us for a long time that what's been going on, and people just haven't been paying attention. So I think we need to invite everyone into the conversation and make everybody aware. And I think we might find that there are people who perceive that they're being treated a certain way, and who are being treated that way, and it's just not being recognized by everyone. So we need to start by having that conversation and getting everyone to the table to really communicate on a deep level. And if we need some rebalancing, then that might come out of those conversations, and we can see what might come of that.
Thank you. Katie, continuing with you on the next question. How will you address the issue of a predicted decline in summer water supply due to climate change? And do you support a prohibition on the transfer of water downstream or outside of the Meadow watershed?
Well, I know that there are people who are working on that issue. There was some legislation put forward in our state just recently that would come up with a plan that would make a way for people to avoid selling the water, our precious water, to, for example, Wall Street investors who would take it out of our valley. So I do believe that we need to come up with a plan, and there are several examples out there. It is doable. People are doing it in other places. So we need to just get together and figure out a way to do that. That's the water transfer part. The first part about dealing with the lack of water in the summer, I think we need to figure out. Climate change is happening. We need to plan for it. We need to talk about what we expect our future to look like, come up with our priorities. Are we going to prioritize agriculture over development? Are we going to prioritize our fish habitat? We got to decide our priorities first, and then figure out how to allocate the water appropriately.
Thank you. Andy, same question. How will you address the issue of a predicted decline in the summer water supply due to climate change? And do you support a prohibition on the transfer of water downstream or out of the Methow Basin?
I think two of the biggest things that we could actually do is support the Forest Health Collaborative. Healthy watersheds have been proven to actually create more in-stream flow. Another thing that we could do is irrigators are the biggest users of water in the valley. Help the conservation district, support programs that move from hand lines to pivots to better, more efficiently use water. I think it would help. I support the concept of not moving water out of the county. I want agriculture to be viable in this county. It's the nuances that as everybody says, the devil's in the details. It's trying to figure out, BPA gets credit for the projects that they do for water flowing downstream. So there's a little bit of nuances, but yeah, I support the concept.
Okay, thank you. Andy, next question's for you. How do you view the present working relationship with the Colville Confederated Tribes? And are there areas there that you see that need improvement?
I actually really like working with the Colville tribes. In the last 3.5 years, I think the relationship's gotten a lot stronger because we've supported things that they wanted to do, and we've entered into discussions more often with them. Our actually current planning director came from the Colville tribes. I think that the one thing that people really don't understand is they are a sovereign nation, and government to government communication is a lot different. They just don't come to the table as a stakeholder. They are a government entity, and that's how they want to be treated. And so just getting to understand that better, I think has worked well. And like I said, I think that the relationship's getting a lot stronger.
Thank you. Katie, same question. How do you view the present working relationship with the Colville Confederated Tribes? And are there areas that you see that need improvement?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience personally. I don't have Andy's advantage of having actually worked with them. I have been in communication, trying to set up meetings, but it's been really hard with this COVID to actually communicate. I do understand that they are their own sovereign nation. I believe that they are very proud, and rightly so, of how they run their community and their nation. And I think that they are doing a good job, particularly in forestry management. I have not seen a lot of Colville tribal members appear at county meetings, and that's probably because they do their negotiations and they're talking, outside of the public process. I was very happy to see the planning director that was recently hired. She does come from the Colvilles, and by all accounts, she's very qualified and doing a great job. So I think that's a step in the right direction, and I'd like to see more continuing relationship between the two.
Okay, thank you. Now, we mentioned that you have 2 minutes for closing comments, but before that 2-minute period starts, giving you an opportunity to answer this question, which is there a question that you wish we would have asked you? Katie?
Oh boy. I would have liked to talk a little bit more about our changing climate and how that is an element of so many parts of our lives. I feel like I'm just reading more and more about how, and even financial institutions and how they're making bank loans now are really filtering down into all aspects of our life. And so I really think that it needs to be part of the conversation on everything that we talk about, and just incorporate it into our decision making.
Thank you. Andy, is there a question you would have wished we had asked tonight?
Well, I wish there would have been a question about, how how are we going to provide better services to the taxpayers, and how do we feel we should spend money, that type of thing. More administrative portions, questions about how government runs. Those would have been some good questions to have out there.
Okay, thank you. So now we're reaching the point for closing statements. Katie, we'd like you to have the first opportunity to make a closing statement for 2 minutes.
Okay, so I really enjoyed hearing everybody's questions tonight and talking about the issues. I feel like that's what local politics is all about. The decisions that are made at the local level are the ones that most directly affect our lives. It's what determines our quality of life, from whether we can continue to grow food here locally, to whether we can afford a place to live, to what we see when we look out the window. It is critical that the discussions that inform these decisions include everybody who wants to participate. It's what is at the heart of the phrase "of the people, by the people, and for the people." It has to include all of the people. I came here over 22 years ago, and I'm still going to meetings where the same issues are being argued about. How are we going to manage our water? How are we going to plan for growth? I think it's time to get everyone to the table, come up with a comprehensive plan that we can all be proud of and that will hold up in court. Most of these issues are not insurmountable. We just have to get together and do it. I'm looking forward to getting out when I'm elected and meeting the people in this county. I would love to be stopping by senior centers and having lunch with folks and just hearing the stories that they have to tell. Have occasional town halls now and then where we can just chat and keep up on what's going on in the different communities. That is how you keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on. And I'm really excited and can't wait to get started.
Thank you, Katie. Andy, you have a 2-minute closing statement.
Thanks, George. I want to thank everybody at the Grange for setting this up. It's really good that we're able to do this. People are able to actually see, us talk, and where we can still have these even in the midst of this this ongoing pandemic. Also like to thank everybody who's watching today. You're the ones that vote. You're the people who are the important part of this presentation. I guess getting back to the question that I wish that I was asked, county commissioners do a lot of different things. They wear a lot of different hats. They are the one stop for the budget. You work with roughly $75 to $90 million worth of budget that you have to oversee. You are in charge of the building department, the planning department, the maintenance department. You oversee public works. You are de facto the board members for 3 emergency management districts. You are on the board of public health. And you also do work on other boards. For instance, I'm on the Upper Columbia Salmon Recovery Board. I am on the Wolf Advisory Group. I was appointed by the Secretary of Transportation to the Community Aviation Revitalization Board. So in any one day, a county commissioner can do a lot of different things, all the way down to minutia. And it takes a person that is willing to actually put their nose to the grindstone, do all of the little things that it takes to get the job done. I mean, it's, you have staff out there, but a lot of the times with the budget that we work with and the limited staff that we have, they're worked hard. And so you have to get out and do that. And I feel like that after these 4 years, I've really,
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy and Katie. Thank you both for great answers and thoughtful responses. Good luck to both of you in the election. And now we are going to have a very quick transition, less than 1 minute. We're going to ask Katie and Andy to step away. We're going to invite Keith Gaynor and Adrian Moore to join us. And when they're on the screen, I will get going with this portion. There they are. Welcome again. We are going to ask questions that all except the first have a 1 minute answer duration. The first question you're allowed 2 minutes for, and of course your closing statement will also be 2 minute allowance. Okay, we'd like to start with Adrian. Adrian, how would you define leadership, and what experiences do you believe prepare you to be an effective leader?
Thanks, George. Yeah, and firstly, just thanks for hosting this. Thanks to the Grange and Wendy and Simon and Val. And I really appreciate everybody just tuning in virtually. I know it's not easy to do. And I think in order to answer this question, I want to talk a little bit about my background and what I think an effective leader would be in this moment. So, I think it's clear I'm not a career politician. My work has always been in the community, working with people and families. But that's often meant that I had to work at a regional or a state level, working on policy and budget and legislation around youth homelessness or healthcare or fixing our broken social safety net. And I've done that work. I've been good at that work because of the experiences I've had, because of the work that I've done. So I was born on a farm not on the edge of Lake Roosevelt, not far from where my great-great-grandparents homesteaded in the 1880s. But my parents are ministers, so we moved to small towns and cities across the state with the church. And I've lived my entire adult life, I've lived the values that I was raised with. So I've been on the front lines, working to help families and people in our community build a better life for themselves. From my early days, I was a young mom, a full-time student, and I worked in a domestic violence shelter at night. And in the last 12 years, I've helped build a critical social and health services organization in our region. And after the 2014-15 wildfires, I helped stand up fire recovery efforts. And I brought in critical dollars. I helped change legislation so we were better prepared for the next disaster. But I also made sure that every person up every creek had access to the resources that they needed to recover. And I know from my own experience, from my lived experience, and from the work that I've done, how hard it is to make it in North Central Washington. So unless we change something now, it's only going to get harder and harder. And I think the thing that's most important right now is that we don't have a seat at the decision-making table in Olympia. The State House, the Senate, the governor's seat are all held by Democrats, which means that we don't have someone who's able to advocate at the decision-making table in Olympia. And right now, the risks are too high. We need somebody who's able to be there fighting for the needs of our community.
Thank you, Adrian. Keith, same question. Excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice, so I apologize. How would you define leadership? And what experiences do you believe prepare you to be an effective leader in state government?
My definition of leadership would be saying someone who really has a heart for service. If you're going to be a strong leader in a community, you have to be able to put the interests of others above your own, but yet you see the bigger picture. That you understand the complexities of the situation. You have strong principles, good, sound, solid principles, but you're very flexible in incorporating other viewpoints. And in my experience as a school board member, I had some challenges, because of, you have some very controversial things that come through the school district. And it was a kind of a formative time to work through, issues, to listen carefully to how, other people may feel. And then, of course, I spent the bulk of my life here in the community in different types of service involvement, and all of those things have been very helpful to shape my leadership style. At the county commission level, I was a commissioner for many years, and we had a number of things that really challenged us. It's not easy to just make decisions and just let things go, because every decision you make it affects the very people that you're in contact with on a daily basis. I believe that if you realize that in this case where the best government is the one that's closest to the people, your definition and your interpretation will be shaped by your concern for your fellow neighbors and community members. And really, I think that's to me, that's probably the most important thing, is that you realize that you are a representative, but you have to keep in mind that you're representing the whole district. And we do in the 12th district have a wide variety of interests, and they need a strong voice to represent the different aspects.
Thank you, Keith. We're going to continue with you on the second question. What are your priorities in the next state budget, especially with requests to the pandemic recovery effort? Excuse me, and possible revenue shortfalls?
Well, I think it's a given that it's not a possible revenue. As you mentioned earlier, we're talking about $8.8 billion that we're going to be short. We may make it through this year because of the rainy day fund. That will be exhausted, but we're going to have to take some very hard looks at what we're doing at the state level. And to me, that's been part of the problem with our state. We have grown our budget. The majority has been very willing to continue to expand the state's government. And what we really need to do is take a good hard look at the very things that are most critical. We need to address the basic services. Education is over half of the budget right now. It will still need to be cared for. Healthcare issues need to be addressed. From the transportation standpoint, we definitely are short revenue there from I-976 and the lack of gas tax, because people haven't been moving as much. So there are tremendous challenges, but those would be those things financially would be my biggest concerns.
Thank you. Adrienne, same question. What are your priorities in the next state budget, especially with respect to the pandemic recovery and the revenue shortfalls? Not probable.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is going to be an incredibly hard session. And, I spent the last 15 years working in social and health services, partnering with healthcare systems and juvenile detention and police and local businesses and schools. And I think one of the things that we're going to need is someone who knows the local issues. But more importantly, in all of my work, I worked across divides to meet the needs of our community. And I did that not only because that's how you get things done, but because it's the right thing to do. So right now we need folks who can bring people together. And this is the moment our government needs to show up. It needs to show up for small businesses. It needs to show up for local people. If we do that well, we will recover faster than if we starve our communities. So if our economy is going to recover, we need to make smart investments in businesses, in schools, in healthcare, small business, and our social safety net. One of the things that I've been looking at is after the 2018 recession, states like Kansas that led with austerity measures did not recover. And states like Washington that actually invested back wisely into their communities, our economy has been thriving. So again, we need someone who can actually sit at the decision-making table and can fight for the needs of our community, of our families, and of our people and our small businesses.
Thank you. Next question, also, Adrienne, for you. Is our state adequately addressing the renewed surge in COVID cases? And do you support mandatory measures?
Yeah. Oh, it says, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I'm from this community. I understand the divides that are causing so much fear, and they're based on fear. They're based on misinformation. And in moments like these, both of those things are just really high. And we need leaders that people actually trust, leaders that know their people, that know how to listen, that know how to do the right thing, even when it's hard. And I think one of the most challenging things that's happening right now is we're pitting neighbors against neighbors when our fight is really against the pandemic. Masks aren't causing the recession. Even shutdowns are not proven to cause the recession. Right now, a global pandemic is what's causing the pandemic, as was causing the recession, a global pandemic that we don't have a handle on. And locally, we are in a far worse situation because former county commissioners have gutted our public health systems so that we don't have the resources we need locally. And without that lack of foresight, without that lack of trust, we don't have local leadership who can lead us through this. And that means, unfortunately, we have to rely on West Side health systems in order to show us what we need to do. I wish we had the local expertise, the local leadership to lead us through pandemics like this.
Thank you, Keith. Same question. Is our state adequately addressing the renewed surge in COVID cases? And do you support mandatory measures?
Well, I think the state, has really been struggling. We started out, I think, it was just we hadn't had anything like this before. And so, someone had to come up, and then the governor did come up with some ideas, and he moved forward. And as far as adequately addressing, that's a real tough question, because obviously with the surge, you might say that no, we didn't. But I do think that it's really critical to have local health districts adequately funded. That was one of the things that, as a county commissioner, that I lobbied strongly time and time again at the state, because we were trying to prepare for something like this that we hadn't had. But when it has come, the fact that we were not adequately prepared at the local level was pretty obvious. So, I think it's important to have local control. But, as far as the masking, if that's what it's going to take to get, us getting back into the businesses being open and being able to function, then I think we need to do what needs to be done in order to address the concerns.
Thank you. Next question for you, Keith. What would you do to ensure adequate funding for our schools? And specifically, how would you help rural school districts and their need for more early education and mental health counseling?
Well, it's interesting to talk about education, because what we've seen, or what I've seen in the last 2 years in Olympia, is that there is obviously the urban school districts have a different approach to school, and they have bigger numbers. They can be more flexible with how they staff their facilities. But in the rural districts, we need to give the rural school districts more control. They need to have more flexibility with the money that they do generate. We do have some districts that are, they don't have the tax base, but they're willing to pay more. And what the state did was limit the amount of per thousand that a local district could collect. So in the last 2 years, that's something that I was advocating for, was more local control, more flexibility from even the way the money is categorized, so that the school districts can address their own specific needs and ensure that they can provide the best services for their students.
Thank you. Adrienne, same question. What would you do to ensure adequate funding for our schools? And specifically, how would you help rural school districts and their need for more early education and mental health counseling?
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important question right now. Schools were in a crisis before this moment, but COVID is only making it worse. I partnered with school districts for many years. I have been endorsed in this campaign by the Washington Education Association, by the American Federation of Teachers. And, I say this with such a heavy heart, but Keith's rating from the Washington Education Association is a D. And Keith is a former teacher. You should not be proud of a D. And we need to do better by our kids. We really do. And I think this is one place where we need someone who understands the local issues. I agree with Keith in that West Side policy doesn't always translate well for rural districts like ours. It doesn't. We need to fix our broken school funding formulas. We need to invest in school nurses. We need to invest in counselors. And we need to ensure that rural school districts, despite the zip code that someone lives in, have access to the resources they need for their students to thrive, not only K through 12, but in post-secondary school as well.
Thank you. Adrienne, please take this question. A report released last year by the State Department of Commerce states that a lack of adequate child care and support of working parents has reached a crisis point. Would you support the Child Care is Essential Act that has been introduced in this legislative period?
Yeah, childcare is something that I've championed for a long time. As a leader in a local nonprofit, I led work to increase early childhood education in our school district. I helped build a new childcare in our district to help serve low-income families. And I've worked alongside childcare providers and childcare leaders. I've spoken with many this very week. And, I think we all know that investing in early childhood education is not just the right thing to do, but it's good fiscal policy. I recently spoke to a childcare center in Pateros that said they lose $30,000 every year, but that they can't close down because what would the families in their community do? So, at the moment, what we need is leadership that's going to listen, that's actually going to respond, that understands the issues, and that's willing to go to bat for our local children.
Thank you. Keith, same question. A report released last year by the State Department of Commerce states that the lack of adequate childcare in support of working parents has reached a crisis point. Would you support the Child Care is Essential Act that has been introduced this legislative period?
Well, childcare is something that we have talked a lot about, and when I say a lot, I mean I haven't had an opportunity really to deal with it, but it's become very apparent how critical it is. And I've talked to a number of childcare providers, and their concerns really have to do sometimes with regulation that is making it difficult for them to even provide the services. The cost of childcare it makes it very difficult for people to stay in business. As Adrienne mentioned, I mean, there are a number of childcare providers that have just gone out of business because it isn't financially feasible. But what that does is it does leave a gap in those communities. And so I think that it's important at the state level to be looking at, how can we make this work? What are the things? Is it really just money alone? Or are there other things that can make it more feasible for someone to even start a child care center? So I think we need to take a look at the big picture and do what we can, make the changes that are necessary to make it more attractive for others to get into the child care business.
Okay, thank you. Keith, next question. Recent demonstrations against racism and police misconduct are widespread. How would you balance police reform and support for law enforcement to ensure racial justice and equality?
At the state level there, we've done a number of things that the state has. We've had numerous legislative acts that have really tried to address that. And quite honestly, there are some difficulties with the bad actors, because we do have some, unfortunately, some policemen that have conducted themselves in a way that is outside of the guidelines. I mean, no one should be treated, with disrespect the way that we've observed. So I think the police reform, I think we have things in place, but we also have to give some flexibility. I know that the counties and the cities, when they are addressing that, I mean, it is something we need to look at with, binding arbitration. But we also need, as I said earlier, to make sure that we have the respect. We've got to get beyond the racial prejudice that we've seen, surface. So it's important for us to make sure that we are addressing that in a very meaningful manner.
Thank you. Adrienne, same question to you. Recent demonstrations against racism and police misconduct are widespread. How would you balance police reform and support for law enforcement to ensure racial justice and equality?
Yeah, the reason we're having this conversation is because people are struggling, right? They're struggling in our community, they're struggling across the state, and people are frustrated for real reasons. Racism affects their everyday lives. They want a future that they can see themselves in, that their children are safe in, that their children can go out and play and not be afraid. And, just like the vast majority of folks across our state, absolutely, I would get behind police reform. And I would make sure that children in our community are invested in that reform, that the youth that are up in arms right now are part of making that reform happen. And then we're reinvesting trust in our police force, that we're reinvesting trust in our government, because our government and police are doing the right thing.
Thank you. Adrienne, next question. What can you do at the state level to help heal the unhealthy political divisions and discord that has developed in our country?
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest things one of the biggest reasons that I'm running. I think people across this district believe that no matter who you are or where you come from or what you look like or what you do for a living, if you work hard, you should make it. And I do think that there are a few people at the top that are purposely dividing communities like ours in order to rig the economy for their own gain and leaving the rest of us to fight over the scraps. And I think that's where division comes from in our community. So if we're going to have strong leadership, it's going to be leadership that's going to take on greed, that's going to take on corruption, and that's actually going to show up across the community. This isn't an us versus them fight. This isn't a left versus right fight. We are all in this together, employers and workers. We need each of these people in our community to be supported, to be able to thrive. And that means we need state level policy that supports not just workers and not just employees, but make sure that we reduce the cost of living, that we provide the necessary healthcare and schools and housing so that everybody has access to a better life here in North Central Washington. And I think that's how you reduce the divides that are, ramping up across our communities.
Thank you. Keith, same question to you. What can you do at the state level to help heal the unhealthy political divisions and discord that has developed in our country?
Well, at the state level, as was mentioned, we have a one-party system. So the things that we see at the state level are really, that's something that we're working to try and correct. That's what, our party, the Republicans, have been doing. I do not believe in the strong partisanship. I think there is a good reason to have, the different parties because we come at things from a little different perspective. But there should be an opportunity for us to reach across the aisle, and that's been, my goal all the while I've been in public service is to always listen to the people who are not in agreement with me, so that I may understand better what their issues are. Because if I'm, thinking that I have all the answers and I don't incorporate, someone else's viewpoint, then I really am short-sighted, and I'm not being a very good representative. So I think that that's what we need to do as representatives is to work across the aisle to be the best that we can be to make the state of Washington better.
Thank you. And I believe, Adrian, you had your hand raised for a rebuttal. 1 minute.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that we need a diversity of opinions in Olympia. And I also think that that's not what we have from our district right now. That said, I've worked with all of our representatives. I've worked with our Senator Brad Hawkins. I've worked with Mike Steele, and I've spent some time with our Representative Keith Gaynor here. And, one of the things that I've really admired about Mike Steele's representation is that he's worked across the aisle over and over again to get things done in Olympia. And what we've seen in Keith's voting record is that he sides with his voting record is deeply partisan. He always votes with the party bloc. He hasn't worked across the aisle in Olympia. I've spoken with many legislators in Olympia who say that because we're not working across the aisle, because he's not working across the aisle, he can't get things done. And I think that's a disappointment. I think we need people who not only will say that they'll bridge divides, but who actually do it when it really matters. And right now, it really matters.
Thank you. Keith, I noticed you had your hand raised for a rebuttal.
Yes, and I appreciate the opportunity to really talk about what I have done in the 2 sessions that I've been in Olympia, and that is working across the aisle. It's interesting that even on environmental issues that Representative Joe Gibbons, Gail Tarleton, they were both on board with the hydro bill that I had. The other bills that I've sponsored I've had bipartisan support because that's the only way we're going to get anything done. So I guess, you can say that someone's partisan, and quite honestly, when I just got my rating, it showed that I didn't vote, with the party the whole time because, we do have the flexibility within our party to vote our conscience. And I didn't vote every time with the party because we had a variety of things. And so, to me, that's part of good, thoughtful, lawmaking is to think it through and not necessarily just be in lockstep with the party.
Thank you. Keith, will you take the next question first? Do you accept the science that demonstrates the significant role human industry and conduct plays in changing the Earth's climate? And what immediate and significant steps do you think our state should take to reduce our carbon footprint?
Well, at this point, I am on the energy committee. I was appointed at this last session. And, the science that is there, I mean, we definitely have things that man has done and is doing that we can change. And we've made some significant progress. And I think that's what we need to be, careful of. I mean, we're here to be wise stewards of the environment that God's given us. And to, ignore that is not being very, we're not very environmentally conscious, obviously. And as a grower, a farmer, I mean, I'm one who is very concerned about the environment, the changing, of climate and all, because it directly affects my livelihood. So on the one hand, I mean, it's not just because of me, but I mean, I'm just saying that we have to be mindful of the changes and adapt, and the things that we are doing that we may be able to change and do it in a cost-effective manner, then we are pursuing those things. And I think that's what we have to be thinking through.
Thank you. Adrienne, same question to you. Do you accept the science that demonstrates the significant role human industry and conduct plays in changing the Earth's climate? And what immediate and significant steps should our state take to reduce our carbon footprint?
Yeah, thanks, George. As someone who led fire recovery for many years, I've seen the real and devastating impacts of climate change on our community. And it's on the backs of families, it's on the backs of working people that climate change is only getting worse. And, I think North Central Washington is a leader in carbon neutral energy production, and we are well poised to bring in industry, to bring in clean energy and industry and manufacturing to create new jobs. We could be a leader in this field, but we don't have someone in Olympia who is actually advocating, who believes in climate change, and who is actually advocating for those industries to come here and for us to continue to be leaders in those fields. So I think that one, we can get behind good jobs that are going to come. We are going to have a state response to climate change. It is happening. And we need people who can advocate for our district, for our people, for our families in that response, and to ensure that it actually produces a result that is going to work for working families, right? That it's going to work for the people of this district. And we don't have that kind of representation in Olympia right now.
Thank you. Next question, Adrienne. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, Washington State has the most unfair state and local tax system in the country. Washingtonians in the lowest 20% of earners pay 13% of their income on sales and excise taxes. Do you plan to do anything about this issue?
Yeah. Dang, this is a big question and a really important one. I recently spoke with the head of the Wenatchee Education Association, or a leader at the Wenatchee Education Association, who said that the number one issue facing schools is our regressive tax system, that we do not have the tax base to support our schools. We don't have the tax base to support our healthcare systems. We don't have the tax base to support the families and small businesses that are suffering right now. And as we head into a recession, as we look towards recovery, we are absolutely going to need to look at new revenue. Right now, Washington State spends money in huge tax breaks for billion-dollar corporations, and right now they don't need us. And you know who does need us? The little guy, our small businesses, our school districts, our healthcare agencies, and the people and communities of this district. So we are absolutely going to need to address the way that we do taxation in Washington State. And it cannot be on the backs of working people. It cannot be on the backs of middle-class people. It absolutely has to be the people who are making it right now in this COVID landscape have to pay their fair share. They have to be the ones who are supporting the broader economy, because we're all in this together.
Thank you. Keith, same question. According to the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, Washington State has the most unfair state and local tax system in the country. Washingtonians in the lowest 20% of earners pay 13% of their income on sales and excise taxes. Do you plan to do anything about this issue?
Well, we certainly could change the way we do things, but I will say that, as I mentioned earlier, the budget for the state has grown considerably, and it's been, capitalizing on the same types of taxes that have been in place. If we're going to build, strong businesses, small business particularly, the B&O tax is really, to me, a very regressive tax, when you're taxing on the gross before anyone even makes a profit. And when you look at what's happened at the state, the way the tax structure has been, it hasn't been fair. I mean, the rural communities, which really comprise the 12th district, these poor entrepreneurs are struggling. We need to create a tax system that does allow for them to be successful, and not continually put it on the backs of small business to try and carry the weight. Because actually Boeing was the one that got the big tax break, and once again, when you look at who voted it in, I mean, it wasn't the people that were really pushing for small business.
Thank you. Keith, next question. Do you support, and why or why not, the Shulman Conservancy's plan to expand the national parks jurisdiction east to Washington and Harts Passes, thereby allowing the possibility for adequate funding of the Metau's prime destinations?
Well, I think the national park system has been a great asset to the country, and the North Cascades National Park. I mean, it is an area that all of that in the north there is something that's great for the people to use. But I guess I'm not as familiar with this to know the exact amount of money that we're talking about, what the restrictions would be. But anything that would enhance the land that's being set aside. I'm not really in favor of additional wilderness or expanding the park system too much at this point, because it does create it doesn't really enhance, I guess, unless there's strong community support. And if you do have strong community support, where you have local leaders who are willing to step up and take responsibility for management of the area and continued support, then that may be something that we could support.
Thank you. Adrienne, same question. Do you support, and why or why not, the Shulman Conservancy's plan to expand the national park's jurisdiction east to Washington and Harts Passes, thereby allowing the possibility for adequate funding of the Metau's prime destinations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm with Keith in that this is a very specific and hard question, but we did speak with folks recently on this issue. And yes, national parks protect our environment, and we should listen to what our communities are telling us, which is that they want this to happen. So we need to be open to the questions. We need to make sure that it fits within our budget, but we also need to make sure that we are that we are listening deeply to the people in our community, that we're showing up when they ask us to, and that we're responding with legislation that actually supports our public lands, which is a public good for all of us to enjoy and invest in.
Okay, thank you. Adrienne, next question for you. Do you support the reintroduction of grizzly bears into Washington state and the listing of wolves as an endangered species?
It's so funny. This morning somebody said, what's your stance on wolves and grizzly bears? It's a great question, and one that's really divisive. I come from rancher family. My family homesteaded in Eastern Washington for a long time, and we grew up to learn that we should be afraid of wolves. And I also think that, they've been here in the community for a long time. We absolutely have to protect our interests. We have to protect farmers. We have to protect ranchers. And we also have to protect our natural landscape and environment. So there's no easy answers on this. It has to be done with incredible care, incredible regulation, and it has to be done with each person in the community, with all factors in the community's voices being heard, being present at the table, and being part of the legislation and the conversation that's happening. But we do know that this morning, or yesterday morning, the grizzly bear conversation got taken off the table. So we now have fewer issues that we have to decide at a legislative level, which is good in this incredibly high this environment that's going to have a lot of needs on the table.
Thank you. Same question to you, Keith. Do you support the reintroduction of grizzly bears into Washington state and the delisting of wolves as an endangered species?
Well, I was involved as a county commissioner in the initial phases. And, even though they said yesterday that they're going to delist, I think it's important that you stay vigilant, because, it does come back around. But no, I don't support, the grizzly introduction. In fact, there's a state law that prohibits it. But the federal, Fish and Wildlife people, would have been managing it. And that was, to me, just a get around from what the state had already determined was not appropriate for Washington state. And the wolves, they appear to have proliferated. I think that, the threat that they have on farmers and ranchers, I mean, I think, it's important that, you know, if they're there, they're there, but they certainly, you know, if they're going to be deprecating on the cattle and all, I mean, it's important that the farmer has the right to defend his property.
Thank you. We're nearing the end. There is time for 2-minute closing comments, but before that, in 1 minute, Keith, is there a question that you wish we would have asked you tonight?
I guess, you know, I would have liked to talk just a little bit about how state government works, because, you know, it really is frustrating when you go over with the idea that you can dialogue with people, you can share your interests, and you can, you know, hopefully get a better understanding. But the way the system works, there's very little dialogue. And, you know, you have to really work hard, particularly when you have committee assignments. In my case, I had 4 committees that I was on. I had to make sure that I had a clear understanding of the bills that I was dealing with. And, you know, to try and then get the ones I was really interested in also, you know, it really is a challenge because there's such a limited amount of time and there's just a plethora of bills. And I wish, you know, we could talk a little bit about how the whole process works and the challenges and how important it is to establish those relationships that I feel are so critical in being successful as a legislator. So, you know, it would have been nice to have had a little more time to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. Same question, Adrian. Is there a question you wish we would have asked this evening?
Yeah, you know, first I just want to say thank you to Keith. I actually think what he just said is such an important issue, that it is hard to get things done, that it is a challenging climate, and that it is important that we have a Democrat at the table so that we can get more things done in Olympia. I also just really genuinely appreciate anyone who is working on the behalf of this community, and I truly believe that Keith is trying to do just that. I really do. You know, I think in answer to your question, George, I wish we talked a little bit about healthcare. You know, I work in the healthcare industry. I have been championing healthcare legislation for a long time. And I recently met with a group of healthcare leaders in our district who said that they were in crisis. They were in crisis before the pandemic, and they're in crisis even more. And we need leadership that understands the issues and is ready to make the system actually work. And, you know, at the same time, I've been talking with thousands of people across this district, and they know that our healthcare system is failing them. So right now we can provide interventions for middle income earners. My own family often had to choose to not have health insurance because it was too much for a middle income family to buy. We need to improve Medicaid reimbursement rates. I think Keith and I are both on that one, but that alone isn't going to fix it. We need to incentivize high quality primary care, and we need to make sure that the primary driver of healthcare isn't money, it's people and health. And right now in a pandemic, that's more important than ever.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me. Keith, would you go first with a 2-minute closing statement?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to, you know, talk with everyone tonight, and I've really appreciated the honor and to represent the 12th district. We have a very diverse district. There's so many different things that really are in crisis right now. We've talked a little bit about healthcare. We've got an agriculture industry, you know, education. I mean, there's so many things that it's very difficult to really zero in. But the reality of being a representative is one who is trying to, you know, have a better understanding of the interests of their district, the concerns that you have, and the ability to try and work through the process to meet those needs. Now, some of the things that, you know, I really believe that we need to let people, you know, maybe loosen up. When I say loosen up, I mean allow people to prosper. And what our state has done through the taxation of small business and business in general, and some of the labor issues, and we've really made it difficult for people to prosper. And that's really what we're trying to do, is to allow individuals to be creative. We had some of the greatest minds in the state of Washington, you know, bring us some great industry. They provided great jobs, and you know, the more we can do that, the better we will be as a state. I think that, you know, for me, it's important to, you know, to really zero in on the things that I really can make a difference on, because some of the things, as I mentioned, you can't know everything about everything. And so you want to make sure that the things that you are focusing on, your efforts are being profitable. You are meeting the needs of your constituents. And that to me is the biggest challenge, but it's also the biggest privilege to be able to represent people who are good, hardworking citizens. And really what they want to do is have an environment where they can raise their family, enjoy life. And that's really, my goal is to be the best representative I can for them.
Thank you, Keith. Adrienne, do you have a closing statement for 2 minutes?
Yeah. I said it before, and I'll say it again, that it is hard for people to make it out here. And I don't think it's about lack of opportunity. I think it's about lack of good policy. I really do. We need change, or there's going to be a downward trajectory. It is getting harder and harder for families to make it here. And if we don't have that change, our own children are not going to be able to come back to this community and buy a house and raise their family and get a good job. So we need to act now. We do. And it's getting harder, not easier, in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a recession. Right now, we have been campaigning across this district. There are people who are so fired up, and, we've worked with hundreds of youth. We've worked with people of retirees and young people and young families, and they are excited about change, not because they want it, but because they need it. And, I think one of the biggest markers of our campaign is how many people are contributing $12. We have over 350 donors, in comparison. And I don't say this to be critical, but it's just a fact that Keith has a few donors. Many of them are big businesses from the West Side. And we have over 350 donors to the campaign. And the vast majority of those are small donors. And they're people who are actually living in this district. I think we need to know that a Democrat can win, not because it's a left-right divide, not because a Democrat is smarter than a Republican, but because we need balance and we need change, and we need someone who understands the issues, that's willing to fight for the people of this district, and that has a seat at the decision-making table.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Keith Gaynor, Adrienne Moore, for very thoughtful responses to the questions. Also like to acknowledge and thank our audience for tuning in and for submitting questions that were used tonight. We obviously couldn't get to them all. Folks can find this recorded event at the same YouTube site. And I believe the Grange website will also carry a link to it at some point if it's not already there. So on behalf of the Twisp Valley Grange, have a great evening. Don't forget to vote on August 4th. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Representative Gaynor. Thanks, Simon.